Hey there, I'm Jesse Fox Mayshark, and this is an archived interview from Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. You can find more information about us, including how to support our efforts, at our website, theprogressivesouth.org. We're on a summer hiatus from Headlights while we work on adding some new features and content, but in the meantime, I wanted to highlight some of our interviews from the past year for anyone who missed them. Of course, you can find all our prior episodes, 57 so far, in the archives. This week, we're replaying an interview from last summer with Dom Kelly, the co-founder, president, and CEO of New Disabled South, a nonprofit organization based in Atlanta. He's been organizing in the South since 2009, committed to building a progressive future for disabled people in his region. Dom is one of a set of triplets born with cerebral palsy and has been a disability advocate since he was 4 years old. He received a Master of Science in Nonprofit Leadership from the University of Pennsylvania's School of Social Policy and Practice, where he also received the Excellence in Social Impact Award. Additionally, he holds a bachelor's degree in music production and a master's degree in journalism. He co-founded New Disabled South in 2022 after working on Stacey Abrams' campaign for governor. The organization advocates for disabled people across the South, a region where, as Dom says in the interview, there are particular barriers to accessibility and inclusion. So, Seth, let's go to the tape. And I am very glad that Dom Kelly has taken the time to join us today. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on, and thank you for doing what you do. This is so needed, especially in the South.
Yeah, there's a lot of things needed in the South, as we know. So I talked in the intro about your background as an advocate, and it says that really started when you were very young. Can you just kind of talk about that a little bit, what your background was growing up, how you became involved in advocacy work early on, and then kind of how that has evolved over time?
For sure. So I kind of half joke when I say this, but my mom dropped my brothers and I in front of a room full of high school seniors and said, "You're going to tell your story. Good luck." And that was like kind of the start of how I became an advocate. And that's half true because we did, at 4 years old, get in front of a room full of high schoolers, high school seniors, and talk about our story. She was there with us. She didn't leave us there, but we were, empowered at a very young age, myself and my two triplet brothers, to talk about our own experience having cerebral palsy and what that meant for our lives. And, really her intention was like, you're going to learn how to tell your story because someone else is going to try to do it for you. And so that was really the start. And from there on, my brothers and I kind of started to just share about like who we were and our lived experience. And, that I think helped educate our peers. And we did that through elementary school and middle school. And that was just really, I think I kind of got bit by the bug a little bit at a very young age, just learning how to not only talk about my story, but then also how to be a self-advocate, because the other thing my mom was really good at was advocating for us, but she knew that she wasn't going to be able to be around us all day, every day. And so we learned how to say what we needed. In school, oftentimes teachers, or a lot of times substitute teachers, like we would have issues with getting our access needs met, or sometimes substitute teachers not believing that we were allowed to leave class 5 minutes early so that we could navigate the halls without, a big crowd to get to our next class. And, I learned how to like not argue in a way that was, I don't know, like I learned how to argue and for myself, for my needs. And the self-advocacy was a really big piece of that. So that started at a young age. And then my fraternal triplet brother died when we were 6 years old. And I think that really kind of that experience, I think, was the thing that made me feel the most sure that this was what I wanted to do with my life in some way. And then over the years, that has shifted and changed with a career in music and incorporating the advocacy and with our music career, and all the different twists and turns my career has taken. Is this advocacy piece has always been a part of it in different ways, and that kind of led me to eventually like movement organizing and politics and where I am now.
And this was, I know you're in Georgia now. Did you grow up in Georgia?
I grew up an hour north of New York City until I was a teenager, and then my identical brother and I have a little brother who's 3 years younger. The three of us had a band together, and so we convinced my parents to homeschool us so we could tour after middle school. And they said yes, and then we moved south. So we were in Charleston, South Carolina for a long time, and that was getting to know the guys in Hootie and the Blowfish, and they kind of were the first ones to really encourage us to come south, and met a bunch of our music peers in the South. And we were, very weird kids who were like 10 years old and could tell you like all about the Athens, Georgia music scene. Like no one else in our town in upstate New York like knew, they knew REM maybe, but not the, wider Athens scene, or like the, Triangle, North Carolina music scene, and, Let's Active and the DVs. Like we were like weird kids. So we always wanted to like be down south and be a part of those scenes. And that was like why we kind of made our way down south as teenagers. And then we've just been here ever since.
Right. So music was really the kind of draw that brought you south.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it was, when we started touring, we went from like playing shows in the tri-state area to then touring in the South almost exclusively. And it was, not just because our heroes were in the South and then our peers were in the South, but also we just came down here and saw that there was like it was just a different culture, different environment. And we wanted to be a part of it. As a family, we fell in love with the South, and, as a band, it just felt like the right place for our music and what we wanted to do with our career at the time.
So then for you, that also turned into activism and advocacy in the South and in Georgia in particular. And you had this experience working on Stacey Abrams' gubernatorial campaign, and then with her voting rights organization. Can you talk about that a little bit? How did you get into that work? And then what did you learn there that you are now taking with you into the work you're doing now?
Yeah. I think I got into the work. I had been organizing in, different, movement spaces with different organizations when I was in Charleston and Savannah and then in Atlanta. And I kind of like always credit Indigo Girls and Joan Baez for like the reason I got into politics, because, I was touring with them, recording, and, they integrate politics so seamlessly into their music and in their careers. And so they were kind of the reason why I got into organizing. And then from there, really, like I was actually working as a managing editor for an online news site for a while, and, politics adjacent, and really feeling like I wanted to be on the other side of that, and found myself like knowing about Stacey's work, really like understanding what she was doing and her vision for Georgia and the country, and really kind of had my sights set on like how can I do that work with her, and wound up getting a job at her voting rights organization, which at the time was new, and that just led to joining her team as a fundraiser, to like building a portfolio of work there at Fair Fight that was focused on disability rights and like the impact of, anti-voting legislation on disabled people, and doing some coalition building and working across teams to improve accessibility of all our programs. And then that led to Stacey, when she decided to run for governor again, having me and a few other people build her campaign, and we left Fair Fight, and then we built the campaign and started on that journey. And that was an incredible experience, building a $100 million gubernatorial race, and going across the state and meeting voters, and really focusing on building a campaign that, as Stacey does, is focused on communities that typically candidates don't usually talk to, kind of like the Obama organizing approach that, won him the presidency in 2008, but like doing that in Georgia at scale, which is what Stacey built for a decade. And we were able to do that for disabled folks, and built I think in campaign history, the first ever like full department focused on disability engagement and disability community engagement, and also first political campaign in history to have full-time sign language interpreters on staff. And we also had disabled people working across our departments, not just in the disability engagement department, which was also really a critical part of making sure that like not only were we reaching disabled voters, but that like disabled folks were a part of the work we were doing it in every way. So it was an incredible experience, and I had been working on the idea for New Disabled South since like end of 2019, and it was like end of 2021 when we launched the campaign, and that was when I was like, I think once the campaign's over, it's time to officially launch this, and kind of worked on it part-time on the side for most of 2020, for all of 2022 until November, and then, jumped into New Disabled South full-time. And I think the work with Stacey really informed a lot of the work that we do at New Disabled South, and like a continuation, especially on the voting access side, of like some of the stuff we did in Georgia for a few years.
So yeah, talk about New Disabled South. It's a pretty big umbrella name. It covers a wide area and a wide array of needs and interests. So what was your thought and goal in forming it? Just seeing a need for there to be focused on ongoing advocacy in the South?
Yeah, it was definitely that piece, that there needed to be not just the advocacy, but also just like an organizing strategy that was that connected the states in our region, understanding that like so many of the issues that we face here in Georgia, y'all face in Tennessee, like we have in states across the South, and there is such a through line between all of those issues and like the reason why those issues exist, the consolidation of power in each of our states, and just understanding that if in order for us to see progress in the South, we needed to break out of silos as a disability like rights and justice ecosystem, that our state level groups needed to be working with each other across the South on strategy, on gathering resources and building a base. And so that was really, it was like, we need to expand that. We need to break folks out of our silos. And then it was just a need for us to take this regional lens and have, a narrative that is cohesive around not just like, shifting the narrative around disability in general, which is a big piece of what we do, but also making sure people understand why disabled people live in poverty at twice the rate of non-disabled people, why disabled people in the South are more likely to be incarcerated, why they're more likely to be food insecure and housing insecure. And the why really, like I said, comes down to policy choices. It comes down to consolidation of power. It comes down to systemic ableism and racism, legacy of Jim Crow and eugenics and slavery here in the South. And so that's a big piece of what we do, is like that political education, so that folks can be mobilized, can be educated and then mobilized across our region, because we need to build a base here of politicized disabled people in order to like build power. I would say expand our power, but unfortunately, disabled people don't have a lot of power. And so in the South particularly, but even across the country. And so we need to really build power in a way that's just different from and the legislative advocacy is critical, of course, but like it needs to be beyond legislative. It needs to really be like a movement building, systems building, beyond Congress, beyond our state houses. And so that's a bit of how we're approaching it.
So yeah, from the big picture standpoint, I'm curious, obviously we had the ADA passed going on 35 years ago. And I think, as with a lot of our major civil rights legislation, there might be a tendency for people who aren't or don't feel themselves to be directly impacted to kind of have a sense of, well, we solved these problems, right? I see, ramps for wheelchairs everywhere, and there's bathrooms and so forth. What is the sort of the state of the nation, I guess, as far as the status of disability rights in your view? And then more particularly, what are the ways in which those are maybe specific in the South?
Yeah. So you reminded me of something that Judy Heumann said. Judy Heumann was one of the leaders of the disability rights movement. And she said, I'm tired of having to be thankful for accessible toilets. And it's true. I think you're right that people really see, our gains in the disability rights movement as like, we achieved it. We did it. We got the ADA passed, and it was bipartisan, and now disabled people can get around the world. And like, it's actually just not true at all. I mean, we can get around in the world a little bit easier than we could before 1990. But the ADA does not come with a, for lack of a better term, like police force that enforces the ADA, right? Like, so we still have to figure out if someone violates the ADA, how do we actually make sure that they improve? Like, we have to find a lawyer, we have to have the resources to sue, or we file a complaint with the Department of Justice or whoever we have to go to, whatever agency, federal, state, whatever it is, and then they have to go through a process. And it's like, and then part of the burden there is like, how do you educate people, right? Like, there's compliance, legal compliance, but access goes beyond legal compliance. And so, yeah, a ramp is great. But if your building is so small, my wheelchair can't fit in it, well, like, that's not really accessible. It's even more than that. So I think, that's one piece, is the accessibility, right? And like that's an important piece, but the ADA doesn't stop Black disabled folks from being incarcerated and making up 2/3 of our state and federal prison population. Like, the ADA doesn't, make sure that disabled folks can have access to accessible, affordable housing, or access to transportation in rural parts of our country, especially in the South, where in a state like Georgia, we've got 9 counties that don't have a single doctor. So if you're a disabled person and maybe you don't have a car because you can't drive your own car, and there's no public transportation infrastructure in most of these counties and here in Georgia, like, how do you get to the next county to go to a doctor, right? Like, the ADA doesn't solve for all of those issues. It doesn't solve for systemic ableism that like runs rampant, in this country, because country was built on systemic ableism. And like, you can't really legislate that. Just like you can't legislate, against racism. Like, there are things you can do, but ultimately it's a societal shift. It's a shift in thinking. And so on the legislative side, yeah, we need way more than the ADA, but also like beyond that, we need like to shift hearts and minds. We need like people to understand that disabled people are human. Disability is a human experience. And, that takes like really deep organizing. That takes investment from funders. And ideally it takes, government partnership, right, to like help do that if the government was bought in, beyond just like simply passing a bill that, provides access. So in an ideal world, that's what we would be doing with the like increasing access for people in this country. But it's so much more than the ADA, and it's so much more than the systems we have in this country are built to be able to do.
And what about the South in particular? Are the needs greater in the South? And if so, why and what form does that take?
They are, and there's a few reasons. One is the South has 1/3 of all disabled people in the entire country. So we have the most disabled folks, the majority of whom are Black. And this is like, of course, the reality that we have the most disabled people means that like there are way more issues that the South has to try to solve here than any other region in the country. But also we have, like I said, the legacy of eugenics, of slavery, of Jim Crow that all inform our policies and our systems today. Like when we talk about voting access, we've seen rampant disinformation around voting. We've seen rampant voter suppression across the South. The architects of this voter suppression are fueled by racism, and as well, ableism, maybe less directly, but indirectly, if you're targeting Black folks in a rural county, making it harder for them to vote, more than likely the folks who are going to have the hardest time voting are like Black disabled people, Black people who are aging and need mobility aids, right? Like who can't stand in long lines for hours on end and may not be able to, use any other machine than an accessible voting machine. And all of a sudden, there are no accessible voting machines because they're broken, or, the voter suppression is sometimes not, it is sometimes weaponized incompetence in a way as well. So like, that's just one example, but there's the realities that our states in the South have some of the highest poverty rates in the country. And like, that is almost always, disabled people in some way, are represented in our poverty rates, like disproportionately, whether they are disabled people who rely on disability or some other, government benefit program, but like, or they're disabled people who don't have a diagnosis, who don't receive, any kind of government assistance to help them, and they can't afford, or they can't access a job that's higher paying, or they, can't work a full 40-hour week, or they have 3 kids and they're managing a chronic health issue. Like, that's not a unique situation. Like, you can go anywhere in the country and find that, but in the South, there's a reason why we have the highest rates of these kinds of stories than anywhere else in the country, because the people who have held on to power for so long don't have an interest in lifting people from poverty and don't have an interest to improving healthcare infrastructure. Otherwise, they would have expanded Medicaid, years ago. And so that there's all those issues that compound, and that's what makes the South really, I think, the focal point for these crises nationally. And also, I think, where there's the most opportunity to like see progress, and build a movement, because people will be, politicized when they are, facing crisis and no one's there to help them, that's usually when people get kind of radicalized and realize they want to do something.
Well, so you've been at this for a couple of years now. What are your major priorities and projects in 2025? And I'm also just curious how what's going on at the federal level is impacting all of this, because obviously we're seeing, you just mentioned expansion of Medicaid, and instead we're apparently going to see people thrown off of Medicaid, more rural hospitals at danger of closing, a lot of concern from people about education services and disability services in classrooms and schools. So what are your top concerns right now?
Yeah. So my top concern right now is it's healthcare access, but even more broadly, honestly, it's survival. And that's actually really our strategy and our work this year. Like we did a lot of work on trying to save Medicaid from these cuts, with a bunch of national organizations. And we've been building the organizing infrastructure and strategy to be able to have survival be our focus this year and beyond. So we're not a direct service organization, but having resource sharing being a part of our organizing strategy, making sure that if folks lose their Medicaid, they know where they can access healthcare, even trying to help build the infrastructure for mutual aid work. And one of the ways we're doing that is there's what's called care webs, and they're kind of mutual aid networks of folks, usually disabled folks, who give each other care in the absence of getting a Medicaid in-home care waiver or something like that, or they can't afford a personal care attendant. We're working to help not just build those across the South, but also operationalize them and build an infrastructure for a new system of care that is mutual. And so that is a part of our survival strategy, is to be able to help resource those and build those, or help, facilitate those kinds of networks. So that's a huge priority right now. We are doing some work on immigration defense. So there are, disabled migrants, especially those who have been detained, who are not getting their needs met. And so we're doing some work with some immigrant rights groups to do some organizing around that. That's an enormous priority for us, this year. And then, we do a lot of work. And so all of it is continuing and is a priority. But I think the last piece for us right now is thinking about elections ahead and, what could happen with those elections, assuming we still have, I would say free and fair elections, but we haven't really had those in a while. But, what are we doing now? We're doing some strategy right now to think about what to prepare for midterm elections, making sure disabled voters are, we're thinking about their access needs, the ballot box, and legislation that might come that might impede that. And so that's part of our work, as well. But the people organizing is really the key around survival, is really the key strategy for us right in this moment. All
right. Well, I guess that's a good place to wrap it up. I know people can get more information about all of this on your website, which we will, of course, link in the show notes. And it's really impressive what you've put together. And thanks a lot for taking time to talk about it.
Thanks for having me.
And that wraps up this archive interview. Remember, you can find any episodes you've missed right here in our archives. We'll talk to you soon.